Recently, I decided to try traditional art again after a small break from it. So I decided to make a video on it, and today I'm going to list 5 traditional art tips for mainly digital but also traditional artists. And this video includes all the different traditional art mediums, including both paints and types of markers. So the first tip I have is about knowing what the right colors are to use. Unless you're using acrylic paints, you can't just press undo if you decide you don't like a color as much as you thought you would. So the solution for this is through a process called thumbnailing. You can do this with digital art too, but I find it a lot more useful with traditional art. But anyway, how thumbnailing works is you take a blank sheet of paper and roughly sketch out a few smaller and less detailed versions of the drawing you want to color. And then you test out the color schemes you have in mind in each individual little thumbnail before you apply the colors to the real artwork. This way, you can see if the colors look good or not, or which color schemes look a lot better than you thought they would. So for example, if you look at the video I have up on the screen, I'm using the thumbnailing process for one of my marker drawings. I'm trying out different color schemes, and in the end, I'll select which one I like best for the real illustration. And my second tip is about making sure you know what the colors are going to look like on paper, especially for markers, since the colors on the caps of your markers don't always look the same as what the actual color of the marker is. That's why I think it's a really good idea to swatch all of your marker colors before you use them in an illustration. Adding on to this tip to include paints, you should make sure you know what these colors are going to look like after they dry. For example, acrylic paints dry to be a lot darker than the colors originally were when you put them on the paper, and they also dry very quickly compared to the other paints. And some paint types don't change that much after they dry, but just in case it does, make sure you look up how your specific paints will look when they're dry. Now, tip number 3 is knowing how to layer your colors based on the medium. For markers, make sure that you layer the colors light to dark, starting with one of the lightest marker shades you have, and even if you plan for the overall color scheme to be dark. But for gouache paints, start with a mid-tone instead of adding the darker or lighter colors first. And for the 4th tip, I'm going to introduce a really quick and easy lighting hack to make your traditional art look like you used layer modes. Based on the lighting scenario, pick a color that fits the color scheme but isn't too dark or too light. Then, if the current colors of your artwork are dried, fill in the shadows with that color. It works for most mediums that have a bit of transparency to it, so I don't recommend trying it on acrylics for that reason. In my experience, this trick works best on alcohol markers. And the last tip, tip number 5, is actually my favorite tip. And I'm going to tell you a really easy way to clean things up, fix mistakes, and add extra details or shading to your artworks. For this step in your art, use some colored pencils, and since they will go over any medium but give you a lot of control, you can use them to change things however you want. And you can do this without worrying about messing up your whole artwork for the most part. I like to play around with subtle shadows and highlights in different colors, especially with blues and purples. And that's all for this video. I hope you found all the tips useful. And feel free to comment your own tips for traditional art.